Hey loves, welcome back to my channel, and for those of you that are brand new, my name is Candace. So this week I have gotten so many emails and so many DMs from ladies who are starting a new IVF cycle. It has just been crazy, and I looked at the calendar and I realized 2 years ago on the 4th of July I actually started my first IVF cycle, which is so crazy to take a walk down memory lane. I took my first birth control pill on the 4th of July 2 years ago. Here we are 2 years later, 2 IVF cycles later, that we have our sweet Victory, who is 6 months. So I just get so many questions about, do I have any tips? Do I have any advice? Do I have any encouragement for any ladies that are starting a new IVF cycle? And so that's exactly what this video is going to be. I've already done an IVF tips video, which I will link up top and down below, which so many women have told me that my tips have helped them find success in their IVF cycle. So this is going to be a little bit different from that video. That video I went pretty much step by step of all the changes that I made in my second IVF cycle, which I feel led me to have success and to get pregnant and to have Victory. But in this video, it's just going to be a quick little 10 almost like words of advice that I can give to anyone who is starting a new IVF cycle, and just to kind of ease your mind a little bit and to encourage you. Just putting myself kind of back 2 years ago when I first started that first IVF cycle, and just maybe some things that I wish I had known just going into a new IVF cycle. So I hope that this video will help someone who is starting a new IVF cycle, and for anyone who is, I just want to say good luck. I'm sending so much positivity and so many prayers your way. So my first word of advice is to take things one day at a time. I know it's so hard to do that because when you're in an IVF cycle, especially if it's your first one and you have no idea what to expect, you are just like anxious and you're anticipating the next step. Okay, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? Take things one day at a time. Just live today, get through today. If you're starting your pills, if you're starting birth control or whatever type of suppression that you're starting, if you're starting your stems, wherever it is you find yourself in your IVF cycle, just live in that moment. And if you don't, you will literally drive yourself crazy and you will become overwhelmed trying to figure out all the next steps. So take one day at a time. That's my first word of advice to you. The second piece of advice I can give is something that people don't like to hear a lot, but the first IVF cycle can sometimes be considered like trial and error. So I know we spent all this money, we have all of these high hopes, and we're hoping to get pregnant on the first try, which many women do, which is wonderful for them. But for majority of us, we don't get pregnant on our first IVF cycle, because what the doctor is doing is they're taking a protocol that they feel is the best, and they're using that same protocol for every woman that comes into their office. But what you're not realizing is everybody is different, everybody responds differently. Sometimes, you know, the protocol may be too much for one person but not enough for another person. So you have to kind of look at the first IVF cycle, unfortunately, as a trial and error, because once you go through that cycle, if you are not successful, the doctor can then look at every step in your IVF cycle and say, okay, maybe we gave her too much of this medicine, maybe we need to give her more of this medicine. Whatever it is they need to do to kind of change for the next cycle, and hopefully you will have success after the first cycle. So the third point of advice goes with number 2, which is you may need more than one IVF cycle. I literally had no idea. When I went into my first IVF cycle, I was so hopeful. I knew I was going to have all these embryos. We were going to get pregnant on the first transfer, and that was going to be it. So when our first IVF transfer was unsuccessful, I was devastated. And I think that's one thing people don't tell you enough. Like, we always want to be positive, we always want to encourage people, but I also want to be realistic and say it may not work the first time, and you know what, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. I know it's devastating and it's difficult and it's heartbreaking, but it's not the end of the world if you do need another IVF cycle. And so that's really my third point of advice, is just knowing, you know what, you may have to do it all over again, and it'll be worth it in the end once you get your little miracle baby. So the next point I want to tell you guys is something that I did a lot, and I want to warn you not to do this, is to not get caught up on numbers. So Women love to say how many eggs they have gotten retrieved and how many embryos they have in the freezer. And I remember I was going through my first IVF cycle, and I had, I think it was 16 eggs retrieved. And then this other girl, I went onto Instagram and she had like something like 47 eggs or something retrieved. And I was like, oh my God, like she has all these eggs and I didn't have enough eggs. Does that mean that, you know, my IVF cycle isn't going to be successful? And so it's so easy to get caught up on the numbers of how many eggs you had retrieved, how many embryos you had left. And so actually at the end of the day, it doesn't even matter. It doesn't matter if you have 50 eggs retrieved or 5. The only thing that's going to matter is if you have embryos and if you transfer that embryo and you get pregnant and have a baby. Nobody cares if you had 50 eggs retrieved or 5 eggs retrieved. So let's just be honest. Don't get caught up on the numbers. Don't get caught up in comparing how many eggs or how many embryos you have versus what someone else has. And then going along with that is another thing. Don't compare your symptoms to other people. And I know for me, I'm guilty of this. When you're in your 2-week wait, you're all over Google and YouTube like, okay, I'm on day 5. What did someone feel on day 5 and they got pregnant? Okay, so I felt that, so that means that I'm pregnant. Like, I'm so guilty of that, I know, y'all. And it gives you a little bit of peace of mind, but unfortunately, a lot of the symptoms that you feel can be negative or positive. Like, they can go both ways. And so another word of advice is not to compare what you're feeling to someone else. I know you guys have heard the saying, comparison is the thief of joy. It literally is, because I know sometimes I would look up on the internet people's symptoms and then I would just literally begin feeling drained because I'm like, well, I'm not feeling what they're feeling, so that means it didn't work, or that means that I'm not pregnant and they got pregnant and they had this cramp feeling like this on this side of their stomach and I didn't feel that little cramp, so that means it wasn't working. Y'all, this will drive y'all crazy if you don't just stay focused and stay positive. Stay off of Google, stay off of YouTube, and if you do choose to watch videos or read articles, don't compare what you're feeling to someone else. And I know sometimes that does give us a little bit of comfort when someone has gotten pregnant and you feel that you have the same symptoms that they do, but a lot of times if you don't feel those same symptoms, it can have an adverse effect. It can make you begin to feel deflated, like, you know, I don't feel what they're feeling, and so it just completely like take the joy away from your whole cycle. So my next word of advice is to keep a journal. I know what you're feeling now. You probably are just ready for it to be over and you're ready to have your baby, but I promise you, when you look back, like for me, I'm looking back 2 years ago and I have a journal that I kept and I'm reading all of these symptoms and all of these feelings. And you know, the birth control had me like crazy. I was a hormonal maniac, and so I'm just reading some of the diary entries that I wrote where, you know, and it just feels good to be able to go back and to read and just put myself exactly where I was 2 years ago when I first started that IVF cycle. So I would advise you to keep a journal, to do some type of video diary so that you can go back and just relive those moments and just remember where you've come from, and it will make you so much more grateful of where you are once you do get your miracle baby. I know that I used to always get mad when people would say, oh, it only takes one. But you know what? Literally, that is so true. It literally only takes one sperm to fertilize one egg. It literally only takes one embryo to implant and become your miracle baby. And so people used to always be like, oh, it only takes one. But for me, I always felt like I needed all of these embryos and I needed all of these high numbers in order to have success. And that's just not true. I know so many girls that I talk to even now that went through a whole IVF cycle, ended up with one embryo and ended up getting pregnant with that one embryo. And so don't get caught up on needing all of these, you know, embryos in the freezer to make you feel a certain way. Like literally you only need one embryo to have your miracle baby. So that's my next word of advice, is just it only takes one, and stay positive if you don't get the numbers that you're expecting. So out of all of my pieces of advice, I think this one is probably the hardest one. And so I would say don't get caught up on delays. I know when I was in the middle of my journey and the doctor would delay me, or I would run into some type of delay where I couldn't do my transfer when I wanted to, I was so frustrated. And I have a video I'm gonna link up top for you guys where I literally was over it. Like every time I went to the doctor thinking I was about to schedule my transfer, there was another delay, and I was just so angry, and I was crying. I was frustrated because I was just like, I want my baby. But you know what, a lot of times delays are good for us, because I was delayed 3 months. I had my egg retrieval in January, and I didn't do my transfer until April. And it's not because I didn't want to do my transfer. It was because every time I went to the doctor had another idea of something he wanted to do. And that was the actual cycle that I got pregnant on, and that I ended up having our daughter Victory on. So don't get caught up on delays. I know it's frustrating. I know you just want things to happen right now. But for me, it was like the first time my doctor wanted to do another sonal histogram to make sure that everything was all clear. And then I had to do my ERA test. And then I was like, okay, cool, I'm gonna do this ERA test, and then I'm gonna do my transfer like the next week. Nope, I had to do the transfer the following cycle. So I had 3 months of delays, which ended up being the biggest blessing for me, because we got to rule out everything that could possibly go wrong in my second IVF cycle. And that's the cycle I found success in. Yeah, so the baby started crying. So I had to go get her. So my next point is that you need to lean on your support system. So you need to gather whoever it is you can that will support you in your IVF cycle, and you need to lean on them, especially when you are going through an IVF cycle. You need to be able to call someone to encourage you and to keep you, uplifted, and to stay positive with you, and to be able to share your good news with. So that's my next point. I have one final point. So my last tip is to watch my IVF tips video, which goes into so much detail about what I did differently from my first IVF cycle and what I feel helped me have success in the second IVF cycle. So it's like so much detail, and I get asked the same question over and over again, and so that's why I made a video that was so detailed, so that it could answer as many of your questions as possible. So I would recommend you watch that video, which I will link up top. And Tim and I did another video which we talked about all of the changes that we made as we were going into our second IVF cycle. And so that gives the perspective from a woman and from a male of all the different things that we've changed that helped us have a better chance of success in the second IVF cycle. So those are all of my tips for those of you that are starting a new IVF cycle. I want you guys to stay positive, and I can't wait to hear about all of these miracle babies that are coming from these IVF cycles that you guys are doing. So I hope this video helped you guys in some way, and I hope that it encouraged you wherever you find yourself in your IVF cycle. If you guys have any other questions, I would love to hear them down below in the comments. And of course, I'm always available via social media, and my email is listed in the description box as well. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope that you found my pieces of advice useful for those of you that are starting a new IVF cycle. I hope you guys have an amazing week, and I'll be back next time with another video. If you are not yet a part of my little family, please be sure to hit that subscribe button down below so that you don't miss any of the videos that I'll be posting. Be sure to give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and to share it with anyone that you know who is starting an IVF cycle. Thanks again, guys. Bye.